The train wheezed to a stop, black smoke curling into the gray Wyoming sky like a question mark. Nobody wanted to answer. June Elowen Bishop sat alone in the last car, her gloved hands folded over a worn carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. Through the frost-kissed window, she could see Bitter Hollow Station, a wooden platform that looked like it might blow away with the next strong wind. Nobody was waiting. She'd expected that. Really, expected it the way a person expects rain when storm clouds gather. But hoping gets in the way of good sense sometimes. The letter in her pocket read so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases promised different. Promised a man of God would be standing there with open arms and an open heart, ready to make her his wife and give her the new life she'd fled Kansas to find. June stood, ducking her head automatically even though the train car ceiling cleared her by inches. At 6 feet in her boots, she'd learned to make herself smaller in a world built for petite women and average men. Her traveling dress, a sensible brown wool that had seen better decades, hung a touch too short at the ankles. She'd let the hem out twice already, but fabric only stretches so far. The conductor, a wiry man with tobacco-stained whiskers, gave her a look that mixed pity with something else relief. Maybe that she was getting off his train. "This your stop, miss?" "Yes, sir." Her voice came out steady. 3 days on the rails had taught her to keep it that way. "Got someone meeting you?" He glanced past her shoulder at the empty platform. "I expect so." The lie tasted bitter as chicory coffee, but it went down easier than the truth. June hefted her carpet bag and made her way down the narrow aisle. Other passengers, a mother with 2 small boys, a businessman in a dusty suit, an old woman knitting, watched her pass like she was a circus act. She kept her eyes forward and her spine straight. Let them look. She'd been looked at all her life. The cold hit her the moment she stepped onto the platform. Wyoming wind had teeth, and it bit through her wool dress like it was made of cotton. She set her bag down and scanned the station. A few buildings huddled together against the weather, a depot. What looked like a general store, and beyond that, the scattered beginnings of a town that seemed to be having second thoughts about existing. "Reverend Ellery," she called it out once, then again louder, "Reverend William Ellery." The wind took her words and scattered them like seeds on barren ground. A door banged open at the depot, and a man emerged grizzled, wearing a badge, and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The station agent, she guessed. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her height, her traveling clothes, her aloneness. "Help you, miss. I'm looking for Reverend William Ellery. He was supposed to—" She let the sentence die. No point in finishing what was already finished. The agent scratched his jaw. "Reverend's likely at the church, down the main road. Can't miss it. Got a steeple and everything." He paused, squinting at her. "You expected—" "I have correspondence." She touched her pocket where the letter lived. The sound held volumes. "Well, church is that way. About a quarter a mile. Road's muddy from the snow melt, so watch your step." June thanked him and picked up her bag. A quarter mile. She'd walked farther for less hope than this. The main road of Bitter Hollow was indeed muddy, a river of brown slush that sucked at her boots with every step. She kept to the wooden sidewalks where they existed, but they were sporadic things, appearing and disappearing like good intentions. The town itself seemed caught between ambition and resignation. New buildings standing next to weathered shacks. Signs advertising services that might or might not still exist. People watched her pass. Men loading wagons, women sweeping storefronts, children playing in the mud. They all stopped to stare at the tall woman walking alone with her carpet bag and her stubborn hope. She heard whispers, caught fragments. Lord above, look at the size of her. Must be near tall as Jake Morrison. What's a woman like that doing here alone? June kept walking. In Kansas, they'd called her the bishop girl who grew too tall, as if height was something she'd done on purpose, like staying out past curfew or wearing her hair loose on Sundays. as if she'd chosen to tower over every boy in school, every man at church socials, even her own father before he died. The church appeared around a bend white clapboard with a modest steeple, trying its best to look holy in a town that seemed to have other priorities. June paused at the gate, her heart doing a little dance of hope and dread. This was it, the end of 3 days' journey, 1,000 miles from everything she'd known, all on the promise of a man who'd advertised for a God-fearing woman of good character to be his bride. She'd written back with careful honesty, told him she was 26, unmarried, could read and write and cipher, told him she kept house well, could cook and sew and tend a garden. What she hadn't told him was why a woman with all those qualities was still unmarried at 26, hadn't mentioned the height that made her a curiosity in every room she entered, hadn't explained about Thomas McKinnon, who'd courted her for 2 years only to marry tiny Mary Patterson because a man needs to feel like a man. June. The church door stood open. June climbed the steps, set down her bag, and knocked on the frame. "Come in." The voice was reedy, nervous. She ducked through the doorway into dim coolness. The church was simple inside wooden pews. A plain altar, windows that let in watery light. A man stood at the pulpit, and June's heart sank like a stone in still water. Reverend William Ellery was maybe 5.5 feet tall in his Sunday boots. He turned at her entrance, his face cycling through expressions like pages in a picture book: expectation, confusion, shock, and finally, something that looked like panic. He was younger than his letters had suggested, maybe 30, with thinning hair and hands that fluttered like birds looking for a place to land. "Miss Bishop," the question came out strangled. "Reverend Ellery." She didn't make it a question. They both knew who the other was, and they both knew this wasn't going to end the way the letters had promised. He came down from the pulpit, approaching her like she might bite. When he got close enough to truly see the difference in their heights, she had half a foot on him. Easy, he stopped. That is, your letters didn't—" He swallowed, tried again. "You didn't mention you were so tall. You didn't ask." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "No, I suppose I mean, who would think to—" He was sweating now, despite the church's coolness. "Miss Bishop, I'm sure you understand. A minister's wife must be, that is, the congregation has certain expectations." "About height." She kept her voice level, but something was breaking inside her chest, quiet and thorough as ice cracking on a pond. "About propriety, about natural order." He couldn't meet her eyes. "A wife should look up to her husband. It's biblical." June stood there for a moment, letting the absurdity of it wash over her. She'd traveled 1,000 miles to be rejected for the crime of growing too tall. All those letters, all those pretty words about Christian partnership and building a life together in God's service undone by 6 feet of bone and stubbornness. "I see." She picked up her carpet bag. "I'm sorry to have wasted your time, Reverend." "Wait." He stepped forward, then back, like a dance with invisible music. "Perhaps you could stay in town a while. There might be that is, someone else might want a giant for a wife." The bitterness leaked out despite her best efforts. "Thank you, but no." She left him there, stammering apologies to her back. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving cold needles of almost snow against her face. June stood on the church steps, carpetbag in hand, and faced the truth of her situation. She was alone in a town that didn't want her, with little money and fewer prospects. Going back to Kansas meant admitting defeat, facing the whispers and the pity and her mother's told-you-so silence. Going forward meant what? She didn't know, but standing still wasn't an option. Not when the sun was already tilting toward evening and she needed a place to sleep that wasn't a train car or a church that had rejected her before she'd even properly entered it. June Elowin Bishop straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked back into Bitter Hollow. She'd been too tall all her life. Might as well be too tall with a roof over her head. The wind followed her, whispering promises it couldn't keep, just like everything else in this hard, wide world. The first saloon June passed had a painted sign swinging in the wind, "The Lucky Strike." Laughter and piano music spilled out through the bat-wing doors, along with the smell of tobacco and whiskey. She needed information about lodging, and in her limited experience, saloons were where information lived in towns like this. She pushed through the doors. The music stopped like someone had yanked the piano player's hands off the keys. Every head in the place turned to stare cowboys, merchants, gamblers, all of them suddenly frozen with glasses halfway to their mouths or cards suspended in mid-deal. June had walked into plenty of rooms that went quiet at her entrance. She'd learned to move through that silence like wading through deep water, steady and deliberate, not letting it pull her under. "Excuse me," she said to the bartender, a thick-set man with arms like ham hocks. "I'm looking for lodging, a boarding house or hotel." Someone in the back snickered. Then another. Soon the whole saloon was rumbling with barely suppressed laughter. Well, a man at the nearest table, young, with slicked-back hair and a fancy vest, pushed back his chair and stood. He came up to maybe her shoulder. "Boys, looks like someone ordered a scarecrow in a dress." The laughter exploded then, harsh and mean-spirited. June felt heat climb her neck but kept her expression neutral. "A scarecrow that can talk," another man joined in. "What do you think? Pete, maybe the circus lost one of their acts." "Nah." Pete, the fancy vest, circled her like she was livestock at auction. "This here's what happens when you water your womenfolk too much. They grow like weeds." "Speaking of weeds," June said, her voice cutting through their cackling, "I can see why you gentlemen spend your afternoons in here instead of with your wives. Must be hard to go home when you need a stool to kiss them good night." The laughter died. Pete's face went red as fresh beef. "Now see here. I asked a simple question about lodging." June addressed the bartender again, ignoring Pete entirely. "If you can't help me, just say so. I don't have time for whatever this is supposed to be." The bartender, who'd been watching the exchange with the detached interest of someone who'd seen too many bar fights, finally spoke. "Martha Keene runs a rooming house. Sort of. It's mostly a way station for the stage, but she might have space. End of town, past the livery stable." "Thank you." June turned to leave. "Hey," Pete grabbed her arm. "You can't just—" June looked down at his hand, then at his face. Something in her expression made him let go and step back. "Ma'am," he finished weakly. She left them to their whiskey and wounded pride. Outside, the near dark had settled over Bitter Hollow like a gray blanket. The wind had picked up, driving what was definitely snow now, tiny pellets of ice that stung exposed skin. June pulled her shawl tighter and headed for the end of town, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step. The road deteriorated as she walked, wooden sidewalks giving way to nothing but mud and slush. Her boots were soaked through by the time she spotted the livery stable, a large barn with Henderson's livery painted on the side. Beyond it, a 2-story house squatted against the coming night, windows glowing yellow with lamplight. June knocked on the front door, praying this Martha Keene would be more hospitable than the rest of Bitter Hollow. The woman who answered was small and round, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She looked June up and down once, quick and assessing. You'd be the bride that wasn't wanted. News traveled fast in small towns. June felt her shoulders sag. "Yes, ma'am?" "Well, don't stand there letting all the heat out. Come in before you freeze solid." The entry hall was narrow but warm, smelling of wood smoke and something savory cooking. June had to duck under a low-hanging lamp. "I'm Martha Keene. I run this place, such as it is. You looking for a room?" "Yes, ma'am. Just for tonight. I'll be moving on tomorrow." Martha snorted. "Will you now? And where exactly are you planning to move on to, with the night falling and snow coming down? June didn't have an answer for that. That's what I thought. Come on, then. I've got a room at the back. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. She led June through the house, past a parlor where two men sat smoking pipes, past a kitchen where that savory smell was stronger. The room at the back was indeed simple: a bed, a washstand, a small window looking out at darkness. It's $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper. No men in the rooms, no liquor, no loud noise after 9 o'clock. I only need a week, minimum. That's the rule. Martha's tone brooked no argument. You can leave whenever you want, but I get paid by the week. June reached for her purse, calculating quickly. $2 would leave her with barely enough for train fare back to Kansas. If she decided to go, when she decided to go, because what else was there? She paid. Martha pocketed the money and studied her with those knowing eyes. You had supper? No, ma'am. Kitchen's closed, but I've got stew still warm. You look like you could use it. She paused at the door. Washroom's at the end of the hall. You'll have to mind your head ceiling's low, built for normal-sized folks. I'm used to it. I imagine you are. Martha's voice softened slightly. Stew'll be in the kitchen when you're ready. Alone. June sat on the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of the day. The long journey, the rejection, the humiliation in the saloon, it all pressed down on her like stones. She'd been so certain this would work, so sure that somewhere in this vast country, there'd be a place where her height didn't matter, where she could just be June instead of that tall Bishop girl. But Bitter Hollow was just Kansas with mountains in the background. She washed her face with cold water from the pitcher, tried to smooth the travel wrinkles from her dress, and made her way to the kitchen. The stew was indeed still warm, thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, and June ate it like she hadn't seen food in days. Martha bustled around, cleaning things that already looked clean, not talking but not leaving either. You're not the first, Martha said finally, wiping down the table for the third time. Woman to come out here on a promise that turned to dust. Won't be the last, either. That's supposed to make me feel better. It's supposed to make you feel less alone. Martha sat down across from her. You planning to try again, find another man to marry? June laughed, short and bitter. Who'd want a giant for a wife? You'd be surprised what men want when they get lonely enough, but that's not what I'm asking. Martha leaned forward. I'm asking what you want, besides to be wanted. It was such a simple question, such an impossible question. June had spent so long trying to make herself fit into other people's ideas of what she should be. She'd almost forgotten she might have ideas of her own. I don't know, she admitted. Well, that's honest at least. Martha stood. You can figure it out in the morning. For now, get some sleep. And June... Yes, people here are always going to look, always going to talk. That's what people do when they see something that don't fit their notion of how the world should be. But there's two kinds of looking: the kind that judges, and the kind that just sees. You'll learn to tell the difference, if you stay long enough. June went to bed with those words circling her mind like birds looking for a place to roost. Outside, the snow had turned serious, muffling the sounds of the town, turning Bitter Hollow into something softer than it had been in daylight. She was too tall for the bed, her feet hanging off the end even with her knees bent. Some things, it seemed, were the same no matter how far you traveled. But tomorrow was another day, and she had a week's worth of room and board to figure out what came next. It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing. And for now, that would have to be enough. Morning came wrapped in white. Snow had fallen through the night, transforming Bitter Hollow into something almost pretty, hiding the mud and rough edges under a clean blanket. June woke to the sound of commotion outside, shouts, the whinny of horses, and someone cursing creatively about the weather. She dressed quickly in her other dress, a dark blue wool that was slightly less travel-worn, and made her way to the kitchen. Martha was already there, kneading bread dough with the efficiency of long practice. "Coffee's hot," Martha said without looking up. "Breakfast in an hour, though you might want to see what's happening outside first. Sounds like Jake Morrison's stallion got loose again." June poured coffee and stepped out onto the back porch. The scene in the yard behind the livery stable was pure chaos. A massive black stallion was dancing and rearing, rope trailing from his halter, while 3 men tried unsuccessfully to corner him. Every time they got close, the horse would spin and kick, sending them scrambling. "Damn it! Samson! You ornery!" One of the men dove out of the way as the stallion charged past. June had grown up around horses. Her father had raised them before he died, and she'd spent countless hours in the barn, learning their language of ears and tails and shifting weight. This stallion wasn't mean he was scared, confused by the snow and the shouting and the men waving their arms like angry birds. Without really thinking about it, June set down her coffee and walked into the yard. "Ma'am, stay back," one of the men, the livery owner, she guessed, waved her away. "He's dangerous when he's like this." June ignored him. She moved slowly, hands visible and low, humming tunelessly under her breath. The stallion's ears flicked toward her, curious despite his agitation. "Hey there, big fellow," she said softly. "Having a rough morning?" The horse snorted, pawing the ground, but his rearing had stopped. June kept moving, steady and calm, until she was close enough to see the white rim around his eyes. "All this fuss over a little snow. I know, it's cold and strange, and these men are being awfully loud. Aren't they? Lady, what are you—" "Quiet," June said without taking her eyes off the horse. "You're scaring him worse." She extended her hand slowly, palm up, letting the stallion catch her scent. He stretched his neck out, nostrils flaring, then took a tentative step forward. "That's it. Nothing scary here. Just a woman who's too tall and a horse who's too stubborn. We should get along fine." The stallion lipped at her palm, looking for treats she didn't have. While he was distracted, June caught the trailing rope, smooth and easy like it was nothing at all. There now, that wasn't so hard, was it? She turned to find the 3 men staring at her like she'd performed a miracle. The livery owner, Henderson. She remembered from the sign recovered first. "Well, I'll be damned. Begging your pardon, ma'am. How'd you—" "He was scared, not mean." June handed him the rope. "Sometimes the solution to scared is gentle, not forceful." "You know horses." This from one of the other men, younger, with the bow-legged walk of someone who lived in the saddle. "I was raised with them." Henderson studied her with new interest. "You wouldn't be looking for work, would you?" "My stable hand up and quit last week. Said the horses were too much trouble." Before June could answer, a new voice cut through the morning air. "Henderson, you get that demon horse under control, or I swear I'll—" The speaker came around the corner of the stable and stopped mid-sentence. June's first thought was that she'd finally found someone in Bitter Hollow who made her feel normal-sized. The man was tall, genuinely tall, maybe an inch or two over 6 feet, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of physical work rather than padding, dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw that needed shaving, and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a heavy coat patched at the elbows, boots that had seen better decades. Those coffee-colored eyes took her in with a quick assessment that didn't linger or leer, just cataloged and filed away. "The horse is handled. Boaz?" Henderson said. "This lady here just walked up and caught him like he was a barn kitten." Boaz, what kind of name was that, shifted his attention to the stallion. Then back to June. "You caught Samson." "He was just scared." "Scared." He said it flat, like he was testing the word. "That horse has kicked 3 men into next week." Then maybe those 3 men should have tried listening instead of yelling. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. "Boaz Granger. I run the Triple B Ranch up in the hill country." June Bishop. She didn't offer her hand. Men sometimes took that as an invitation to prove something about grip strength. "You're the bride from Kansas." It wasn't a question, and June felt heat rise in her cheeks. Was past tense. "Ellery's a fool." He said it matter of fact, like commenting on the weather. "Always has been. Thinks God cares more about appearances than character." Henderson cleared his throat. "I was just asking Miss Bishop if she'd be interested in some work. Could use someone good with horses. I appreciate the offer, but..." "Think about it." Boaz interrupted. His voice was deep, rumbling up from somewhere near his boots. "Henderson pays fair, and the horses don't care how tall you are." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that managed to be polite without being mocking, and headed for the stable. "Henderson, I need those grain sacks loaded. Snow's going to get worse before it gets better, and I want to be back at the ranch before the roads close." June watched him go, unsettled by the encounter. She'd grown used to men who either dismissed her or wanted to put her in her place. Boaz Granger had done neither. He just talked to her, like she was a person instead of a curiosity. "Offer stands." Henderson said, "$1 a day, 6 days a week. You'd be mucking stalls, feeding, exercising the horses when their owners don't come. Nothing a lady should have to do, but..." He shrugged. "These aren't usual circumstances." $1 a day, $6 a week. Real money. Enough to save for... what, she still didn't know. But it was better than sitting in her rented room, waiting for life to happen. "When would you need me to start?" "Soon as you can. Today, if you're willing." June thought about her 2 dresses, both wool, both impractical for stable work. "I'll need different clothes. Mercantile should have what you need. Tell Paulson to put it on my account. Take it out of your first week's wages." It was decided that quickly. June Bishop, who'd come to Bitter Hollow to be a minister's wife, was now a stable hand. The Lord certainly had a sense of humor. She went back inside to tell Martha, who took the news with a knowing nod. "Better than moping. And Henderson's decent enough. He'll work you hard but fair." At the Mercantile, June endured the stares and whispers of other shoppers as she purchased work clothes, men's pants that might actually be long enough, sturdy shirts, a canvas jacket. The clerk, Paulson, made a face when she said to charge it to Henderson's account. "You sure about this? Ladies don't generally..." "I'm not generally a lady." June cut him off. "I'm specifically one, and specifically, I need these clothes to work." Back at the livery stable, she changed in an empty stall, feeling strange and free in pants for the first time in her life. The work was hard. Henderson hadn't lied about that. Mucking stalls, hauling water, mixing feed. But the horses didn't care that she was too tall or that her hands were too big, or that she'd been rejected before she'd even properly arrived. Around midday, she was brushing down a gentle mare when a shadow fell across the stall entrance. Boaz Granger stood there, leaning against the frame like he had all the time in the world. "Henderson put you right to work, I see." "I asked for it." June kept brushing, steady strokes that made the mare's coat shine. "Idle hands and all that." "Devil's workshop," he agreed. "Though I never figured the devil for being particularly industrious himself." It surprised a laugh out of her short, but genuine. Maybe that's why he needs the workshop. This time, he did smile. Just a little. Just enough to create lines at the corners of his eyes. "I'm heading back to the ranch. Roads are getting bad, but if you find yourself needing work after Henderson runs out of stalls to muck, we could use someone at the Triple B. Always got horses need tending, and my men are better with cattle than anything equine." "Why?" The question popped out before June could stop it. "You don't know me. Don't know if I'm any good." "You caught Samson without raising your voice or your hand. That tells me enough." He straightened. "Besides, work's work. We don't get enough folks through here to be picky about the packages they come in." He left before she could respond, taking his wagon loaded with grain up the road that wound into the hills. June stood there holding the brush, wondering if she'd just been insulted or complimented or something in between. "That's Boaz for you," Henderson said, appearing with a pitchfork. "Says what he means what he says. Not much for pretty words, but he's solid. Runs the best ranch in 3 counties. Treats his men fair. If he offers work, it's worth considering." June went back to brushing the mare, but her thoughts kept drifting to coffee-colored eyes and the novel experience of being talked to instead of stared at. It was probably nothing. Just a rancher needing help and not caring where it came from. But as the afternoon wore on and the snow continued to fall, June found herself glancing toward the hills, wondering what kind of place the Triple B was, and what kind of man named a ranch after himself and then spent his mornings arguing with demon horses and offering work to rejected brides. Probably nothing, she told herself again. But maybe something, maybe. 3 days passed in a blur of hay and horse sweat. June found rhythm in the work muck. Water, feed, brush, repeat. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached, then strengthened. The horses grew used to her presence, whickering soft greetings when she entered the stable each morning. On the 4th day, Reverend William Ellery appeared. June was cleaning tack in the small room off the main stable when Henderson stuck his head in. "Someone here to see you, Miss Bishop." She knew who it was before she saw him. Something in Henderson's tone, carefully neutral, gave it away. June set down the bridle she'd been oiling and wiped her hands on her pants, an action that still felt rebelliously free. Ellery stood in the stable entrance looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. His thin face was pinched with cold and something else embarrassment. Maybe, or the particular discomfort of a man forced to confront his own smallness. "Miss Bishop." He removed his hat, holding it in front of him like a shield. "Might I have a word?" June could have made him ask in front of Henderson, in front of the horses and the stable boys and anyone else who might wander by. Part of her wanted to, but her mother had raised her better than that, even if her mother's lessons hadn't included what to do when rejected by a mail-order husband. "Outside," she said. They stood in the yard, snow beginning to fall again in fat, lazy flakes. Ellery had to look up to meet her eyes, and she saw him swallow hard. "I've been praying," he started, "about our situation." "Our situation," June kept her voice level. "We don't have a situation, Reverend. You made that clear." "Yes, well," he shifted his weight, hat turning in nervous circles. "I may have been hasty in my judgment." June said nothing. Sometimes silence was the best response to words that didn't deserve the dignity of acknowledgement. "What I mean to say is," he took a breath, seemed to steel himself. "I've reconsidered. The position that is, the offer of marriage remains open." "Does it now?" "The congregation has questions, naturally, about you working here, dressed as you are. It's not seemly for a woman who might become who could be a minister's wife." "I see." June crossed her arms. "And what changed your mind? Reverend, did the Lord provide new insight about the acceptable height of wives?" Color rose in his pale cheeks. "There's no need for sarcasm. Miss Bishop, I'm trying to do the right thing here." "No, you're trying to save face." The words came out sharp as winter wind. "What happened? Did your congregation start asking why their minister sent away a perfectly good Christian woman? Did the church ladies whisper about what kind of man rejects a bride for being too tall? That's not... Or maybe you realized that finding another woman willing to marry sight unseen and move to Bitter Hollow isn't as easy as placing an advertisement." Ellery's face had gone from pink to red to an alarming purple. "I am offering you respectability, Miss Bishop, a position in the community, a home. You're offering me a cage sized for a smaller bird." "I don't know what you mean." June looked down at him, really looked, saw the narrow shoulders, the weak chin, the eyes that couldn't quite hold steady. "You want a wife who makes you feel tall. Reverend, I can't do that. I can't shrink myself to fit your idea of what's proper. I tried that for 26 years in Kansas, and all it got me was bent spine and bruised spirit. So you'd rather work like a man dressed like one? I'd rather be honest about who I am than pretend to be something I'm not for the comfort of others. He shook his head, disbelief and disgust warring on his features. You're making a mistake. No decent man will have you now. Not after you've been seen doing this. He gestured at her work clothes, the stable, her entire existence. Then I guess I'll have to settle for an indecent one. June turned to go back inside. This is your last chance. His voice cracked on the words. I won't ask again. June paused in the doorway, looked back over her shoulder. Promise. She left him standing in the falling snow, his hat still spinning in his hands like a prayer wheel that had lost its purpose. Inside, Henderson was trying very hard to look busy with a feed ledger. Everything all right? Fine. June picked up the bridle, went back to oiling leather with hands that barely trembled. Just a man learning that some things can't be fixed with second thoughts. Henderson grunted. For what it's worth, you made the right choice. Ellery's the kind who'd spend 40 years making you pay for being taller than him. 40 years. June tested the weight of that. That's a long time to spend bent over. That it is. Henderson marked something in his ledger. By the way, Boaz Granger sent word. Still needs someone at the Triple B if you're interested. Says he'll match what I'm paying plus room and board. June's hand stilled on the leather. When? Soon as this snow lets up. Road to his place is near impassable right now, but should clear in a day or two. Henderson glanced at her. It's honest work, and Boaz is honest people. But it's isolated up there. Town's a half-day ride in good weather. Isolated sounded like heaven after 4 days of being Bitter Hollow's favorite spectacle. I'll think about it. But she'd already decided. Had decided. Maybe the moment Boaz Granger looked at her with those coffee-colored eyes and didn't flinch. That evening, June was in her room at Martha's, mending a tear in her work shirt. When Martha knocked and entered with a cup of tea, heard Ellery came calling. News travels fast. Faster than snow falls. Martha set the tea on the washstand. Also heard you sent him packing. He sent himself packing. I just declined to follow. Martha settled her bulk in the room's single chair, which creaked alarmingly. You know what you're doing. Girl turning down the only offer of marriage you're likely to get in these parts. June set down her sewing. Do you think I should have said yes? Spent my life making myself smaller so he could feel bigger? I think you should know what you're choosing. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. This territory's hard on women alone. Harder still on women who don't fit the mold. I don't fit the mold anywhere. No, I suppose you don't. Martha was quiet for a moment. You know why I came out here 20 years ago? June shook her head. My husband brought me promised adventure, new life, all that. What he didn't mention was the isolation, the wind that never stops blowing, the way winter tries to kill you personal-like. She smiled wryly. He lasted 3 years before heading back east. Left me with this house and a mortgage I couldn't pay. But you stayed. I stayed, turned the house into a rooming house, learned to fix what broke, shoot what threatened, and ignore what didn't matter. Martha leaned forward. I'm not saying it was easy. I'm not saying it didn't get lonely enough to echo. But I'm saying it's possible, if you're strong enough, if you're sure enough. I'm sure I can't marry a man who looks at me like I'm a problem to solve. Fair enough. Martha stood, chair protesting again. Henderson says you might take work at the Triple B. Considering it. Boaz Granger's a good man. Odd as a $3 bill sometimes, but good. Keeps to himself mostly, but treats his people fair. You could do worse for an employer. After Martha left, June sat by the window watching snow fall on Bitter Hollow. Somewhere in town, Reverend Ellery was probably writing another advertisement for another bride, one who'd arrive at regulation height, The church ladies were probably discussing the scandal of June Bishop, who chose pants over propriety. Let them talk. She'd made her choice not just today, but the moment she'd stepped off that train with no one waiting. The moment she'd caught Samson instead of cowering. The moment she'd looked William Ellery in the eye and refused to apologize for her existence. Tomorrow or the next day, when the roads cleared, she'd pack her few belongings and head up into the hills. Take work at a ranch run by a man who said what he meant and looked her in the eye when he said it. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she left Kansas, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the life you imagined was always too small for the person you were meant to become. June Elowen Bishop, stable hand, soon-to-be ranch hand, too tall for normal folks and apparently just right for horses and honest work and men who didn't think God cared about inches. It would do, for now. It would do just fine. She picked up her sewing again, humming tunelessly as she worked. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering Bitter Hollow's rough edges, filling in the spaces between what was and what might be. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Tonight, she had a shirt to mend and a life to stitch together from whatever pieces fit. The wagon bounced over another rut, and June gripped the seat to keep from sliding into Henderson. Who was driving? The road to the Triple B Ranch was more suggestion than fact, a winding track through hills dotted with pine and scrub brush, still patched with snow in the shadows. "Boaz keeps saying he'll grade this road proper," Henderson said, wrestling with the reins as the horses picked their way around a fallen log. "Been saying it for 5 years now." They'd been climbing steadily for 2 hours, leaving Bitter Hollow behind in its valley like a bad dream at dawn. The air grew thinner, cleaner, scented with pine sap and possibility. June's carpet bag, now supplemented with a canvas sack of work clothes, bounced in the wagon bed with each jolt. "There it is," Henderson said finally, pointing with his whip. The Triple B Ranch sprawled across a natural meadow, mountains rising behind it like protective walls. The main house was built of logs and ambition 2 stories, a wide porch, smoke rising from not 1 but 2 chimneys, barns and outbuildings scattered around it like children around a mother's skirts. It was bigger than June had expected, more established. "Boaz built most of it himself," Henderson said, reading her expression. "Him and his brother, before Ben died. That was 3 winters back, maybe 4. Time runs different up here." They rolled into the yard, and men materialized from various buildings to watch their arrival. Ranch hands, weathered and worn as old leather, all trying not to stare too obviously at the tall woman climbing down from the wagon. Boaz emerged from the main barn, wiping his hands on a rag. In the clear mountain light, he looked both younger and older than June remembered lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and snow, but something almost boyish in the way he walked, loose-limbed and easy. "Miss Bishop," he nodded to her, then to Henderson. "Appreciate you making the trip, Tom." "Road's getting worse," Henderson said. "You really ought to grade it proper, I know." Boaz's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "I'll put it on the list, right after fixing the roof on the grain shed and replacing half the corral posts." Henderson snorted. "Always something, isn't there?" "Always something." Boaz agreed. He turned to June. "Let me show you where you'll be staying." He picked up her bags before she could protest, heading toward a smaller building set apart from the bunkhouse. "Used to be the original homestead cabin. My brother and I lived here while we built the main house. It's not much, but it's private. Figured you'd prefer that to bunking with the hands." The cabin was neat as a pin inside one room with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. A window looked out toward the mountains, their peaks lost in afternoon clouds. "Outhouse is behind, pumps by the door. You'll take meals in the main house kitchen with the rest of us." He set her bags by the bed. "Any questions?" "When do I start?" "How about tomorrow? Give you today to settle in." He paused at the door. "Cookie serves supper at 6. That's about an hour from now. I'll introduce you to the boys then." Alone, June unpacked slowly. 3 dresses, her new work clothes, the Bible her mother had pressed into her hands at the train station, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, everything she owned in the world, and it didn't even fill the small dresser. She changed into a clean work shirt and her best pair of the canvas pants, then ventured outside to explore. The ranch was even larger up close, clearly successful despite or perhaps because of its isolation. The horses in the corral were quality stock, the buildings well maintained despite Boaz's list of repairs. You'd be the new help. June turned to find a man watching her from the barn entrance, middle-aged, with the bow-legged stance of a lifetime horseman and eyes that missed nothing. "June Bishop," she said. "Frank Morrison. I'm the foreman here." He looked her up and down once, assessing. "Boaz says you're good with horses." "Good enough. We'll see." It wasn't unfriendly, just practical. "Most of our cavvy is mountain bred, tougher than valley horses, but smarter too. They'll test you." I'd expect nothing less. That earned her a slight nod. "Supper bell will ring soon. Kitchen's through the back door of the main house. Don't be late. Cookie gets cranky when his food goes cold." The kitchen, when June found it an hour later, was chaos barely contained. A massive man with arms like tree trunks and a grease-splattered apron was juggling pots on a stove that looked too small for the task. This, she assumed, was Cookie. "You'd be the woman," he said without turning around. "Sit wherever, food'll be up directly." The long table was already half full of men, all of whom stopped talking when June entered. She recognized the universal moment of assessment, the quick glances, the silent communication, the decision of whether she was problem or promise or something to ignore. Boaz entered from another door, saving her from the awkwardness of choosing a seat. "Boys, this is June Bishop. She'll be helping with the horses. June, this collection of trail dust and bad manners is the Triple B crew." He went around the table with names that June tried to file away dusty. Sam, Big Pete, Little Pete, who was actually bigger than Big Pete, Cherokee Joe, and others. Most nodded politely. A few managed ma'am. None of them mentioned her height, though she caught a few raised eyebrows. Cookie slammed platters on the table beef, beans, biscuits, and something that might have been vegetables once upon a time. The men fell on it like wolves, and June understood that questions would wait until after food. "So," one of the Petes said eventually, picking his teeth with a splinter, "you really catch Samson barehanded?" "He caught himself," June said. "I just held the rope." "Henderson says different. Says you walked right up to him like he was a lamb." "Henderson's generous with his stories." "Maybe." Pete, she thought it was Big Pete, leaned back in his chair. "But we got a mare here. Buttercup, sweet name. Devil's temperament. Kicked Cherokee Joe clear into next Tuesday last month." "Still got the bruise," Cherokee Joe confirmed, rubbing his ribs. "Maybe you'll have better luck," Big Pete continued. And there was challenge in it, but not the mean kind, more like a test to see if she'd rise to it or back down. "Maybe I will," June said evenly. Talk turned to ranch business, which sections to move the cattle to, repairs needed before full winter hit, the perpetual argument about whether to grade the road. June listened, learning the rhythms of the place, the personalities, the unspoken hierarchies. After supper, Boaz walked her back to her cabin. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "They'll test you," he said, echoing Frank's earlier warning. "Not from meanness, just their way, proving you belong." "I'm used to being tested." "I imagine you are." They reached her door, and he turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were unreadable. "Why'd you say no to Ellery, really?" June considered how to answer. "You ever try to sleep in a bed that's too small?" He nodded slowly. "After a while, you either learn to curl up so tight you forget what it's like to stretch out, or you get up and find a bigger bed." She met his gaze. "I got tired of curling up." Something shifted in his expression, understanding. Maybe, or recognition. "Well, Miss Bishop, the Triple B's got plenty of room to stretch." He touched his hat and headed back to the main house, leaving June standing in her doorway as stars began to peek through the darkening sky. She'd done it. Left Bitter Hollow. Left Ellery. Left behind the idea that she had to make herself smaller to fit into someone else's life. Tomorrow she'd meet Buttercup the Devil Mare and prove herself to a bunch of cowboys who probably placed bets on how long she'd last. But tonight, she had a cabin of her own, a job that paid fair wages, and a bed that, miracle of miracles, was actually long enough for her. June went inside and lit the lamp, watching shadows dance on the walls of her new home. Through the window, she could see lights glowing in the bunkhouse, hear the faint sound of someone playing a harmonica. She unpacked her mother's Bible, set it on the small shelf by the bed. Not for reading, not tonight, but as reminder of where she'd come from and how far she'd traveled to get here. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, June Bishop stretched out on her bed, toes not hanging off the end, and smiled at the ceiling. Room to stretch indeed. 2 weeks into her time at the Triple B, the snowstorm arrived like an uninvited guest who planned to stay. It started as flurries during morning chores, pretty things dancing in the air while June mucked stalls. By noon, the wind had picked up, driving snow horizontal across the yard. By evening, visibility was down to arm's length. "Going to be a big one," Frank Morrison said, securing the barn doors with extra rope. "Seen clouds like that before. We're in for 3 days minimum." The hands worked fast to prepare, moving the most vulnerable cattle closer to shelter, checking feed supplies, hauling extra firewood. June helped where she could, her height an advantage when reaching for supplies stored high or spotting strays through the swirling white. By nightfall, the ranch was locked down tight. The bunkhouse crew hunkered in their quarters with cards and whiskey. Cookie grumbled about his menu being reduced to whatever didn't require trips to the root cellar. And June sat in her cabin, listening to wind scream around the corners like something alive and angry. The knock on her door came just after dark. She opened it to find Boaz, snow-covered and holding a lantern. "Temperatures dropping fast. That stove enough to keep you warm?" "I'm fine." Even as she said it, she could see her breath in the cabin air. He stepped inside without invitation, going straight to the stove. Damper's stuck. Ben always meant to fix it. He worked at the mechanism with practiced hands. "This cabin gets cold as a grave in storms like this. You can't stay here." "I said I'm fine." "And I said you can't stay here." He straightened. Decision made. "Pack what you need for a few days. You'll stay in the main house until this blows over." June bristled. "I don't need coddling." "It's not coddling. It's sense." His voice carried an edge of authority she hadn't heard before. "I've lost cattle to storms warmer than this. I'm not losing a person to pride." They stared at each other while wind rattled the windows. Finally, June grabbed her carpet bag and stuffed in essentials. "Fine, but I'm not taking your bed." "Wasn't offering it. Got a room upstairs that's empty. Used to be Ben's." The walk to the main house was 20 yards of white blindness. June held on to Boaz's coat while he navigated by memory and instinct, the lantern useless against the wall of snow. By the time they stumbled through the kitchen door, they were both caked white as wedding cakes. "Coffee's hot," Cookie said without looking up from his perpetual pot stirring. "Figured you'd bring her in eventually." Boaz led June upstairs while she tried not to drip on everything. The house's upper floor was simpler than the impressive lower level, a hallway with 3 doors. Boaz opened the middle one. This was Ben's room. He set the lantern on a dresser, illuminating a space that felt frozen in time. "Haven't changed much since... Well, but it's warm and the bed's good." The room was tidy, but personal books on shelves, a guitar in the corner, photographs on the walls. It felt like trespassing. "I can sleep downstairs," June offered. "No." Boaz stood in the doorway. seeming to fight some internal battle. Ben would have wanted the room used, would have liked you, I think. He always said I should hire a woman for the horses, said they had gentler hands. A ghost of a smile. I told him it was hard enough finding men willing to work this far from town. What happened to him? Horse threw him, neck broke clean. Boaz said it flat, like reading a supply list. 3 winters back, found him myself. Snow coming down just like tonight. I'm sorry. Yeah, he cleared his throat. Well, extra blankets in the chest. Come down if you need anything. Alone. June sat on the bed, Ben's bed, and felt the weight of occupying a dead man's space. The room was warm, though. Boaz had been right about that. Heat rose from the stoves below, collecting under the eaves. She unpacked slowly, trying not to disturb too much. On the shelf, between volumes of Shakespeare and farming almanacs, she found a journal, opened it before she could stop herself. Boaz brought home another stray horse today. Swears this one's different, has potential. They all have potential in his eyes. Man would rescue the devil's own mount if it looked hungry enough. Underscore. June closed the journal, feeling like a thief. But the words painted a picture of the brothers Boaz collecting broken things, Ben gently mocking but supporting him anyway. The storm raged for hours. June dozed fitfully, waking to wind sounds like train whistles and something scratching at the window's tree branches. She hoped, near midnight, thirst drove her downstairs for water. The kitchen was dark, except for the stove's glow. She was filling a cup at the pump when a voice made her jump. Can't sleep either. Boaz sat at the table, coffee cup between his hands. He'd changed into dry clothes, but looked tired, older in the dim light. Storm's loud, June said unnecessarily. Always is up here. Mountains catch the wind, throw it around like dice in a cup. He gestured at a chair. Sit if you want. She sat. They listened to the storm together, not talking, not needing to. There was something companionable about shared insomnia, about being the only 2 people awake in a world of wind and snow. I dream about him sometimes, Boaz said eventually. Finding him, same spot, same position. But in the dreams he talks. Tells me about the horse that threw him, how the snow looked falling up from below. He took a sip of coffee. Stupid, I know. Not stupid. I dream about my father sometimes. He's been gone 10 years, but in dreams he's still teaching me to gentle yearlings. He taught you well. He taught me enough. June traced the wood grain of the table. Died before he could teach me the rest. Had to figure that out myself. Maybe that's the best lesson, that you can figure it out yourself. They sat quiet again. The storm seemed to ease slightly, or maybe they'd just grown used to its roar. Why Triple B, June asked. For the ranch name. Ben, Boaz, and our sister Bethany. She died young, fever took her when she was 8, but we wanted her part of it anyway. He smiled slightly. Ben said we should call it Triple Trouble instead. Way our luck ran sometimes. Seems successful enough. Now. Wasn't always. First winter we near starved. Second winter the wolves got half our herd. Third winter, he paused. Third winter Ben died, and I learned the difference between hard and unbearable. June wanted to reach across the table, touch his hand, offer comfort. But this wasn't that kind of moment, that kind of kitchen, that kind of midnight conversation. Instead, she asked, how do you stand it, the isolation? Who says I stand it? His smile was rueful. Some days I talk to the horses just to hear something talk back. Some nights I sit here wondering what I'm trying to prove, living this far from human company. But you stay. I stay. He met her eyes. Land gets in your blood up here. The silence, the space, the way you can see weather coming from 50 miles off. It ruins you for town life. I've only been here 2 weeks. Give it time. He stood, collected both their cups. We should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be long keeping stock alive, and this mess is round-the-clock work. At the stairs, June paused. Boaz, thank you, for the room. Thank Ben, he said softly. He always was the hospitable one. June climbed back to the dead man's room and lay in the dead man's bed, listening to the storm batter the house. But she felt less like an intruder now, more like another stray Boaz had brought in from the cold, given shelter until the weather cleared. She thought about what he'd said, how the land got in your blood, ruined you for town life. 2 weeks wasn't long enough to know if that was true, but lying there, warm and safe while winter tried to tear the world apart outside, June thought she could understand the appeal. The last thing she'd heard before sleep finally took her was Boaz moving around downstairs, checking windows, adding wood to the stove, standing guard against the storm, the way he probably had every winter since Ben died. Taking care of things, taking care of strays, taking care of her. Spring arrived late to the mountains, creeping up the valleys like a cautious visitor. By April, June had been at the Triple B for 5 months, and Bitter Hollow felt like something she'd dreamed rather than lived. The work had hardened her hands and softened her edges, and the men no longer watched her like she might sprout wings or breathe fire. She was in the corral working with a young mare when Cherokee Joe came running from the direction of town, his horse lathered with sweat. Miss June, boss, wants you at the house. We got company from town. June handed the lead rope to Dusty and headed for the main house, brushing hay from her clothes. These days, company from town usually meant someone buying horses or selling supplies, but Cherokee Joe had looked troubled. She found them in the front parlor, a room rarely used except for business that required formality. Boaz stood by the window, tension in every line of his body. Across from him sat 3 people June recognized with a sinking stomach: Reverend Ellery, Mrs. Prudence Hawkins, the self-appointed moral guardian of Bitter Hollow, and Mr. Clarence Whitman from the bank. "Ah, Miss Bishop." Reverend Ellery stood as she entered, as if they were at a social call. "How robust you look." June didn't respond to that. She looked at Boaz instead, reading warning in his eyes. These folks rode all the way up here to express their concerns, Boaz said, his voice carefully neutral. "About your presence at the ranch." "My presence?" "Mrs." Hawkins sniffed, a sound that managed to convey volumes of disapproval. "It's not proper. A young woman living here with all these men. People are talking." "People are always talking," June said. "It's what people do when they don't have enough work to keep them busy." "This is serious. Miss Bishop." Whitman leaned forward, banker's instincts scenting opportunity. "The moral reputation of our community is at stake, and frankly, the reputation of this ranch as well." "The Triple B's reputation is just fine," Boaz said quietly. "Is it?" Ellery had found his courage. "Apparently. You have an unmarried woman living here, working like a man, dressed like one. It's unseemly." "Unseemly?" June tested the word. "Like advertising for a bride and then rejecting her for being too tall." Ellery flushed. "That's not... Or is it only unseemly when I choose my own work instead of waiting for someone to choose me?" "Mrs." Hawkins stood, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her looking up at June. "Young woman, your attitude only proves our concerns. You've become wild, untamed. It's our Christian duty to intervene." "Intervene how, exactly?" Whitman cleared his throat. "There are proprieties to be observed, standards to be maintained. If Mr. Granger wishes to continue doing business in Bitter Hollow, he needs to consider the impact of his household arrangements." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. June felt Boaz tense beside her, understood suddenly that this wasn't just about her. They were using her to pressure him, for what reason she couldn't guess. "I see," Boaz said, and his voice had gone very soft. "And what would you have me do, turn out a good worker because she makes you uncomfortable?" "We're simply suggesting that perhaps Miss Bishop would be happier in a more appropriate situation. Mrs. Hawkins said, "The Ladies' Aid Society has connections. We could find her a position as a domestic in Denver, where her height would be less noticeable in a larger city." "A domestic?" June laughed, short and sharp. "You want me to trade honest ranch work for scrubbing someone else's floors?" "It would be respectable." Ellery insisted. "It would be a cage with doilies." "Miss Bishop." Whitman stood, clearly ready to deliver his closing argument. "Let me be plain. The bank holds several notes critical to local businesses. The church provides moral guidance. The community has standards. Mr. Granger is a successful rancher, but success requires cooperation. Surely you wouldn't want your stubbornness to cause difficulties for your employer." The words hit their target. June felt something cold settle in her stomach. They weren't really here about propriety. They were here about control, about reminding Boaz that even in the mountains, he wasn't beyond their reach. "I think," she began, "I think you should leave." Everyone turned to stare at Boaz. He'd moved from the window to stand beside June, and there was something in his stance that made Whitman take a step back. "I beg your pardon, Mrs." Hawkins sputtered. "I said leave now." His voice was still soft, but there was iron under the quiet. "You rode 4 hours to insult my guest and threaten my business. You've done both. Now get out." Mr. Granger, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Boaz laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "You want to talk reasonable? How about this? The Triple B ships more beef and horses than any 3 other ranches combined. I pay cash for supplies, keep half the businesses in town afloat through winter. You want to threaten that because a woman wears pants and works hard." Ellery found his voice. "It's about moral standards." "No, it's about fear." Boaz stepped forward. "Fear that if one woman chooses different, others might too. Fear that your neat little world might have to expand to fit people who don't match your measurements. This is about Miss Bishop's welfare." "Mrs." Hawkins tried again. "No, ma'am, it's not." June spoke up, finding her voice. "If you cared about my welfare, you'd have asked me what I want. You'd have noticed that I'm healthy, employed, and not bothering anyone who doesn't ride 4 hours just to be bothered." "You can't simply dismiss the community's concerns," Whitman said, but he was already moving toward the door. "Watch me," Boaz said flatly. "And Whitman, next time you want to threaten me, bring more than church ladies and weak tea. The Triple B has accounts in 3 banks. Yours ain't special." They left in a flurry of offended dignity and muttered warnings about consequences. June and Boaz stood in the parlor, listening to their wagon rattle away down the ungraded road. "I'm sorry," June said finally. "I didn't mean to bring trouble." "You didn't bring anything. They've been looking for a lever to use on me for years." He rubbed his jaw. "Whitman wants to buy the water rights to my eastern pasture. Ellery wants me to tithe more. Mrs. Hawkins wants— hell, I don't know what she wants. For everyone to be miserable as her, probably. They could make things difficult. For the ranch. Let them try." He looked at her then. Really looked. And June saw something fierce in his expression. "You know what Ben used to say, that the only way to live in this country is to be too stubborn to die and too contrary to care what anyone thinks. I've got both covered. But the business? We'll be fine. They need me more than I need them. And they know it. This was just testing the fences, seeing if I'd buckle." He smiled then, a real smile that changed his whole face. "They didn't expect you to have teeth." "I've always had teeth. Just took a while to learn how to use them." They stood there a moment longer. Afternoon light slanting through windows. Dust motes dancing between them like tiny celebrations. "I meant what I said." Boaz said quietly, "You're a guest here as long as you want to be. Your work is good. The horses trust you, and the men respect you. That's all that matters to me. Thank you. Don't thank me for doing what's right." He headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and June, next time Whitman comes calling, you have my permission to set Buttercup on him. Girl could use the exercise." June laughed, surprising herself with how good it felt. Buttercup's reformed now. Wouldn't want to undo all that good work. Fair point. We'll use Samson instead. After he left, June stood in the empty parlor, thinking about what had just happened. In Kansas, she'd have apologized, tried to make herself smaller, smoother, less troublesome. Would have taken that domestic position in Denver and been grateful for the chance to disappear. But the mountains had changed her, or maybe just revealed what was always there under the apologies and the curved shoulders. She had teeth now, and the knowledge of how to use them. Let them talk in Bitter Hollow. Let them clutch their pearls and prophesy doom. Up here, the only opinion that mattered was the mountains, and it didn't care how tall she was or what she wore or whether she made small people feel smaller. June headed back to the corral, where the young mare was waiting patiently. The work didn't care about town gossip either. There were horses to train, fences to mend, a ranch to run. And despite what Mrs. Hawkins thought, June Bishop had never been happier to be unseemly in her life. The accident happened on a clear Tuesday morning, the kind of day that made you forget the mountains could turn vicious without warning. June was in the barn, checking the hooves of a recently shod gelding, when she heard the commotion shouts, a horse's scream, then a terrible silence. She ran toward the sound, finding a cluster of hands near the eastern pasture gate. They parted as she approached, and her heart dropped to her boots. Boaz lay crumpled on the ground, his left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. His horse, a young stallion he'd been breaking, danced nervously nearby, reins trailing. What happened? She dropped to her knees beside him. "Stallion spooked at something," Frank Morrison said, his face grim. "Threw him hard. Then the fence post caught his leg on the way down. He's out cold." Boaz's face was white as winter snow, a cut on his forehead seeping blood. June checked his breathing steady. Thank God, then turned to the men. "We need to get him inside. Carefully, Frank. Ride to town for Doc Henshaw. Fast as you can." "That's 4 hours round trip if I kill the horse," Frank said. "Then kill the horse." Frank was gone before the words finished echoing. June turned to the others. "We need something flat to carry him on. A door, boards, anything. And splints for that leg before we move him." The men scattered to follow orders. June stayed with Boaz, using her neckerchief to stem the bleeding from his head. His eyelashes fluttered, and he groaned. "Easy," she said. "Don't try to move." His eyes opened, unfocused. "June, what?" He tried to sit up, gasped, and went white as his body registered the pain. "Your leg's broken. Maybe other things too. We're getting you inside." "The stallion is fine. You're the one who decided to test gravity." She kept her voice light, but her hands shook as she checked his other limbs for brakes. Cherokee Joe and Big Pete returned with a door pulled from the tool shed. Together, they eased Boaz onto it, June holding his legs stable while he bit back screams. The journey to the house felt like miles. Cookie had the kitchen table cleared by the time they carried him in. "Boiling water," he said tersely. "Clean rags in the drawer. Whiskey in the cabinet." They laid Boaz on the table, and June got her first good look at the damage. The leg was bad, shin bone clearly broken, possibly in multiple places. But it was the blow to his head that worried her more. A goose egg was already rising, purple and angry. "Need to set that leg before Doc gets here," Cookie said. "Gets harder the longer we wait." June looked at the men clustered in the kitchen. "Anyone done this before?" Silence. "My PA was a horse doctor." Dusty finally offered. "Watched him set brakes on animals. Can't be that different." It was different. Boaz came fully conscious when they straightened the leg, his scream raw enough to make June's eyes water. She held his shoulders while Dusty and Cookie worked, murmuring nonsense words of comfort that seemed to help neither of them. "Almost done," She lied as Boaz gripped her hand hard enough to crack bones. "Just breathe." "Trying," he gasped. "Not working so well." They got the leg splinted with strips of wood and torn sheets. Boaz passed out again during the process, which was a mercy. June wiped his face with a cool cloth, noting how young he looked unconscious, how vulnerable. "We should move him upstairs." Cookie said, "Table's no place for a man to heal." "His room's too far, too many stairs." June made a decision. "Put him in Ben's room. It's closer." The men exchanged glances. Everyone knew Boaz hadn't set foot in his brother's room since June had vacated it after the blizzard. But they didn't argue, just fashioned a stretcher and carried their boss upstairs. June spent the next hours in a blur of activity, cleaning wounds, changing cool cloths on his forehead, spooning water between his lips when he surfaced enough to swallow. The men took turns checking in, but ranch work couldn't stop for injury. Frank had taken Boaz's best horse, but even so, it would be hours before the doctor arrived. Boaz woke properly near sunset, eyes focusing on June's face with obvious confusion. "Why are you in my room?" "You're in Ben's room," she said gently. "There was an accident." Memory returned with pain. He tried to shift and went rigid. "My leg." "Broken." Dusty said it best he could. "Doctor's coming." He absorbed this, then seemed to register their position, June sitting on the bed beside him, her hand on his forehead. "You don't have to." "Hush. Someone needs to make sure you don't die of stubbornness." "That how Ben went?" "No, Ben went quick." The words slipped out before June could stop them. "You're going slow and painful, which serves you right for riding half-broke stallions." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "He's not half broke. He's 3/4 broke." "Well, you're fully broken, so I guess he won." They sat quietly as shadows lengthened across the room. Boaz dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time he tried to move. June found herself studying his face, noting details invisible in daily life, the scar through his left eyebrow, the early silver at his temples, the way pain carved lines around his mouth. "You're staring," he said without opening his eyes. "Making sure you're still breathing." "I'm too contrary to die. You said so yourself. Or was that Ben?" "That was you, about being too stubborn to die and too contrary to care." "Sounds like me." He opened his eyes then, looking directly at her. "Thank you for taking charge. The men listen to you." "They listen because they respect you. I just borrowed your authority." "No." His good hand found hers on the blanket. "They listen because you've earned it. 5 months of hard work and straight dealing. You're not borrowing anything anymore." "June." The sound of horses in the yard saved her from having to respond. Frank had made good time. Doc Henshaw's grumbling voice carried up the stairs before his body did. The doctor was everything June expected: old, irritable, and competent. He examined Boaz with hands that stayed steady despite the whiskey on his breath. "Clean break, at least. Boy did good setting it." He glanced at June. "Head's the bigger worry. Seen men sleep 3 days from knocks like that. Some don't wake up at all." "He's been awake, talking." "Good sign, but watch him close. Wake him every few hours tonight. Make sure he knows his own name. Any vomiting, confusion worse than usual. You send for me quick." He left medicines and instructions, grumbled about the road conditions, and departed with one of the hands as escort. June found herself alone with Boaz again as full dark settled over the ranch. "You should get some rest." Boaz said, "I'll be fine. Doctor said to wake you every few hours. Can't do that from my cabin. Have Cookie. Cookie's got breakfast for a dozen men to think about. I'm staying." He was too tired or in too much pain to argue further. June settled in the chair beside the bed, the same chair where she'd sat reading Ben's books during the blizzard. Different patient, same vigil. Through the night, she woke him as instructed. Each time he answered her questions, his name, the ranch brand, how many head of cattle they'd sold last fall. coherent if groggy, irritated by the fourth waking. "I know my own name, woman." "Tell me anyway." "Boaz Samuel Granger," satisfied. "Getting there. What's my name?" He went still, in the lamplight. His eyes were unreadable. June Elowen Bishop. Too tall for ministers and too good for broken-down ranchers. "You're not broken down, just broken, temporary condition." "That what you're telling yourself?" June didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. She gave him water, adjusted his pillows, and let him slip back into sleep. But his words circled her mind through the remaining dark hours. Dawn came pale and hesitant, finding them both awake. Boaz's color was better. The confusion cleared, though pain still etched lines around his eyes. "You stayed all night," he said. It wasn't a question. "Someone had to make sure you remembered your name." "June." He caught her hand as she reached to check his forehead. "Why did you stay, really?" She could have given him a dozen easy answers. Because the doctor ordered it. Because it was the right thing to do. Because she owed him for taking her in when the town rejected her. Instead, she told the truth. "Because I couldn't be anywhere else." Something shifted in his expression. A recognition, maybe, or a door opening that had been closed since his brother died. He lifted her hand, pressed it to his lips in a gesture so gentle it made her chest tight. "When I heal up," he said quietly, "we need to talk. About the ranch, about you staying, about things." "When you heal up," she agreed. Cookie's voice boomed from downstairs, announcing breakfast and breaking the moment. June freed her hand, straightened blankets that didn't need straightening. "I should go help with morning chores." "June," he called her back from the doorway. "Tell the men I'm too mean to die. They'll worry otherwise." She smiled. "I'll tell them you're too stubborn. They'll believe that easier." June headed downstairs to face the new day and the work that waited. But something had changed in that long night of vigil. Some understanding reached without words. The ranch would go on. Boaz would heal. And when he did, well, some conversations were worth waiting for. The bitter Hollow Town meeting was held the last Friday of every month in the church, ostensibly to discuss civic matters, but mostly to air grievances and gossip. June had never attended, had never felt welcome to attend, but this time was different. This time, they'd put the Triple B on the agenda. She stood at the back of the packed church, having ridden down alone despite Frank's offer of escort. 3 weeks had passed since Boaz's accident. He was healing, but still couldn't ride, which meant June had come to represent the ranch's interests. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. "Next matter of business," Mayor Tompkins announced, consulting his notes with theatrical importance. "The proposed railroad spur through the Northern Valley." June's attention sharpened. Nobody had mentioned a railroad. William Ellery. She still couldn't think of him as just Ellery stood from his front pew position. The Northern Pacific has expressed interest in running a spur line from the main track to service our growing community. It would bring prosperity, progress, and, he paused for effect, civilization to our frontier town. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. June felt unease crawl up her spine. The proposed route, Ellery continued, producing a map, would follow the natural valley corridor, utilizing existing water sources and minimal grading. Of course, it would require securing right-of-way through several properties. "Whose properties?" someone called out. Clarence Whitman stood, every inch the banker. "The bank has already secured agreements from most landowners along the route, the Harrison Place, the old Baxter homestead, and several smaller holdings. There's just one significant obstacle remaining." June knew before he said it. The Triple B Ranch controls the water rights and the only practical passage through Devil's Canyon. Without their cooperation, the railroad would have to detour 40 miles around the mountains. Every head in the church turned to stare at June. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked to the front. Let them look. She'd gotten used to it. "Mr. Granger couldn't be here tonight," she said, pleased her voice came out steady. "But I can speak for the Triple B. Can you, Mrs. Hawkins's voice dripped acid. "A hired hand speaking for the largest ranch in the county." "A trusted employee speaking for an injured employer," June corrected. "Though I understand why you might not recognize trust, Mrs. Hawkins, it requires actually earning it." Someone coughed to cover a laugh. "Mrs." Hawkins went red. Mayor Tompkins cleared his throat. "Miss Bishop, surely you can see the benefits this railroad would bring. Jobs, commerce, connection to the wider world." "I can see the benefits to the town," June agreed. "What I don't see is the benefit to the Triple B. You're asking us to give up water rights and prime grazing land for the privilege of having locomotives scare our cattle and sparks set fire to our grass." "The railroad would pay fair market value," Whitman interjected. "Whose market? The same bank that holds mortgages on half the properties that already agreed." June let that sink in. "Seems convenient. All those landowners suddenly eager to sell to the railroad." Whitman's face darkened. "Are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. The bank pressures mortgaged properties to sell. The railroad gets its right-of-way cheap. The bank gets paid back with railroad money. Everyone wins except the people who actually work the land." "This is about progress." "Miss Bishop," Ellery said, trying to reclaim control. "About joining the modern world instead of clinging to the past." "This is about greed dressed up in Sunday clothes," June shot back. "You want to run a railroad through the heart of working ranches to make it easier to ship goods and ship in more people who think this land exists for their convenience." "You can't stop progress," someone called from the crowd. June turned to face the assembly. "No, but we can direct it. Run your railroad south of town, through the flatlands nobody's using. Longer, yes, more expensive, certainly, but it doesn't destroy what people have built." "The Triple B doesn't own this entire valley," Whitman said coldly. "One ranch shouldn't dictate terms to an entire community. One ranch shouldn't have to defend itself from an entire community either. But here we are." June reached into her coat, pulled out a letter. "Mr. Granger anticipated this discussion. He asked me to read his response if the railroad came up." She unfolded the paper, Boaz's bold handwriting visible even from a distance. "To the citizens of Bitter Hollow, the Triple B Ranch has been part of this valley for 15 years. We've weathered droughts, floods, wolves, and rustlers. We've buried family in this soil and watered it with our sweat. We've paid our taxes, supported your businesses, and asked only to be left in peace to raise cattle and horses. Now you want us to carve up our land for a railroad that will benefit everyone but us. You pressure us with threats disguised as community concern. You send delegations to question how we live and who we employ. You seem to forget that the Triple B ships more beef than any 3 ranches combined, keeping your merchants in business and your families fed. So let me be clear, the Triple B will not grant right-of-way through Devil's Canyon. Not for the current offer, not for double, not for any price. That canyon waters our herds and shelters them in storms. My brother and I carved that ranch out of wilderness, and I'll not see it carved up for the convenience of men who think progress means destroying what others built. If you want your railroad, find another way. If you want to threaten our business relationships, remember that trails run both directions and other towns would welcome our trade. And if you want to question my judgment in employing Miss Bishop, remember that she's proven more loyal to this land in 6 months than some of you have in 6 years. Respectfully, Boaz Granger." Silence filled the church. June folded the letter carefully, then added her own words. "Mr. Granger is still recovering from injuries sustained while working to keep the ranch profitable, the ranch that keeps many of your businesses alive. He couldn't be here to speak for himself, so I speak for him. The answer is no. Find another route." "You're making a mistake," Ellery said quietly. "Both of you. This town has long memories." "So do the mountains," June replied. They remember who respects them and who tries to blast through them for convenience. She turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Reverend, you were right about one thing. I am too tall for you, in more ways than height. June walked out of the church with her back straight and her head high. Behind her, argument erupted, some supporting the railroad, others questioning the proposed route, a few even defending the Triple B's position. But June didn't stay to listen. She had a 4-hour ride ahead and a ranch to help run. Outside, she found Frank Morrison waiting with the horses. Figured you might want company on the ride back, he said. Were you listening? Everyone in town was listening. Windows were full of faces. He handed her the reins. That was well done. Boaz couldn't have said it better himself. They rode in comfortable silence through the darkening valley, as the lights of Bitter Hollow fell behind. Frank spoke again. They won't let this go easy. Whitman and Ellery have too much invested in that railroad. I know. Boaz know what kind of fight he's picking. June thought about the letter, about the firm handwriting despite his pain, about the way he'd insisted she read it word for word. He knows. He just doesn't care. Man's got spine. I'll give him that. Hiring you proved that much. I thought the men had doubts about me. Frank chuckled. At first, sure, but you've proven yourself 10 times over. Tonight just cinched it, taking on the whole town for the brand that's ride for the brand loyalty. Cowboys respect that above all else. They reached the ranch near midnight. Lamplight glowed in the upper window of the main house Ben's room, where Boaz was still recovering. June unsaddled her horse, bone-tired but too wound up to sleep. Miss June, Frank paused at the barn door. What you said tonight, about mountains remembering my grandmother was Shoshone. She used to say something similar, that the land keeps score, and it always collects its debts. You think we're doing right fighting the railroad? I think the land was here before us and will be here after. Our job is to not mess it up too bad in between. He touched his hat. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to come whether we're ready or not. June finished with her horse and walked to her cabin. But she found herself looking up at that lighted window, wondering if Boaz was awake, if he'd heard about the meeting yet, wondering what battles tomorrow would bring, and whether they'd face them together or apart. In the end, she went to her own bed. Some conversations could wait for morning, but as she drifted toward sleep, June thought about standing alone in that hostile church, speaking for a man and a ranch that had given her a chance when no one else would. She'd walked into Bitter Hollow 6 months ago as a rejected bride, too tall and too proud to accept the role they'd tried to force on her. Tonight, she'd stood before them as something else entirely: advocate, defender, voice for the voiceless. June Bishop, speaking for the Triple B, it had a ring to it, solid and true as mountain stone. The railroad could find another way. The Triple B would endure. And somewhere in the darkness, the mountains kept their patient score. Spring had settled fully into the valley by the time Boaz could walk without his crutch. The railroad controversy had died to embers, though June knew it still smoldered in town meetings and bankers' offices. But here at the Triple B, life moved to older rhythms: calving season, spring roundup, the eternal cycle of grass and growth and survival. June was in the near pasture working with a yearling when she saw him. Boaz stood at the fence, weight careful on his healing leg, watching her guide the young horse through its paces. She'd grown used to his presence these past weeks, quiet appearances at the corrals, longer conversations over evening coffee, a partnership that had shifted into something unnamed but understood. Doc says the leg's nearly good as new, he called out. Nearly isn't the same as completely, June replied, not breaking concentration as the yearling tried to test her. You pushing too hard too fast again? Pot calling the kettle black. You've been up since before dawn. Horses don't understand sick days. She finished the session and led the yearling to the gate. Boaz opened it for her, a simple gesture that somehow felt weighted with meaning. June, we need to talk. She'd been expecting this, dreading it, maybe, or hoping for it. hard to tell the difference anymore. About the ranch, about you, about staying. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the barn. Your work here has been more than I could have asked for. Standing up to the town, keeping things running while I was laid up. The men respect you. Hell, I respect you. There's a but coming. No, but just a question. He stopped walking, turned to face her. In the afternoon light, his eyes were the color of strong coffee and just as warming. What do you want? June Bishop. Not what others want for you, not what's practical or proper. What do you want? It was such a simple question, the same one Martha had asked all those months ago. But now June had an answer. I want to wake up every morning with mountains on the horizon and work to do. I want to train horses that trust me and work alongside men who judge me by my skills, not my size. I want— She paused, gathered courage. I want to stay, if you'll have me, if I'll have you. He laughed, short and almost painful. June, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay since the day you caught Samson. Maybe before that, maybe from the moment you walked into Henderson's stable like you belonged there. Then why all the dancing around it? Because you deserve better than a broken-down rancher with more debts than sense. Because the town already talks about us. And it would only get worse. Because— He rubbed his jaw. A gesture she'd learned meant he was fighting for words. Because my brother's ghost lives in that house, and my own ghosts aren't much better company. June stepped closer, close enough to see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines that pain and loss had carved around his eyes. You think I don't have ghosts? I came here running from a life that never fit, from people who wanted me to be smaller in every way. We've all got ghosts. Boaz. Difference is whether we let them drive or just ride along. And if the town makes good on their threats, if the railroad finds another way to pressure us, then we face it together, or we face it apart. Either way, it needs facing. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was memorizing it. Then, so soft she almost missed it. I can't sleep anymore. Your leg's still hurting. No. He looked away, toward the mountains. I mean, I haven't slept right since the accident, since you spent that night making sure I knew my own name. I lie there in that big house, and all I can think about is how empty it feels, how empty it's felt since Ben died, but somehow more now, like you brought something back to life just by being here, and now I can't ignore the silence anymore. June's heart did something complicated in her chest. Boaz! I don't have pretty words like Ellery. I can't promise you an easy life or town approval or any of the things a woman probably wants. All I've got is this ranch, these mountains, and a promise to never ask you to be smaller than you are. He met her eyes then, and June saw everything he couldn't say written there. But if that's enough, if you think that might be enough— It's enough, June said. It's more than enough. He moved first, or maybe she did. It didn't matter. What mattered was his arms coming around her, strong and sure, and how right it felt to be held by someone who didn't make her feel too tall or too much or too anything except exactly who she was. The men will have opinions. He murmured against her hair. Let them. They've had opinions since I arrived. The town will say I'm taking advantage. The town can hang. They've been looking for reasons to disapprove since I stepped off that train. He pulled back enough to see her face, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. You sure about this? About me, I'm not an easy man to live with. Ask anyone who's tried. I'm not easy either. Too tall, too stubborn, too likely to wear pants and speak my mind. Perfect, he said, and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd seen exchanged at church socials. This was mountain weather, wild and warm, and absolutely certain. When they broke apart, June felt like she'd been struck by lightning in the best possible way. So, she said when she could breathe again, how do we do this? I assume you're not the type for long courtships and chaperoned visits. God, no. He grinned, and she realized it was the first full smile she'd seen from him since his accident. "But I figure we should do things proper enough that nobody can question it. Marry in town if you're willing. Let them all witness it. Then come back here and live our lives the way we see fit." "When?" "Soon as my leg can handle standing through a ceremony. Month. Maybe." "I can wait a month." They stood there in the barn doorway, holding each other like they'd been doing it for years instead of minutes. Outside, the ranch went on horses calling, cattle lowing, men working. But inside this moment, the world had shrunk to just the two of them and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. "June," Boaz said eventually. "That first night, when you stayed up with me, you said you couldn't be anywhere else. Did you mean—" "I meant what I thought I meant then, but also what I know I mean now." She smiled. "Turns out the heart's smarter than the head sometimes." Thank God for that. Cookie's dinner bell rang across the yard, calling everyone to supper. They walked toward the main house together, not touching but aware of each other in a way that made June's skin sing. The men would notice, would talk, would probably start a betting pool on the wedding date. Let them. June had spent her whole life worrying about what others thought, trying to fit into spaces too small for her spirit. But here, with mountain peaks touching the sky, and a man who looked at her like she was exactly the right size, she finally understood what home meant. "Oh," Boaz said as they reached the kitchen door. "One more thing. About sleeping." June raised an eyebrow. "I mean, after we're married. If you still want your own space, the cabin's yours, but—" He looked almost shy, this man who faced down blizzards and wild horses. "That house is too big for one person. Been too big since Ben died. Maybe it's time to fill it up again. With what we planning on adopting every stray horse in Wyoming." I was thinking more like laughter. Conversations that last past sunset. Coffee in the morning with someone who doesn't think silence needs filling. He paused. Maybe someday, if we're blessed. The sound of children who won't care if their mother's taller than their father. June's eyes burned with sudden tears. "You've thought about this?" "Every night since you told the town council where they could put their railroad. Maybe before that." He cupped her face with work-rough hands, infinitely gentle. "I'm not good with words, June, but I'm good at knowing what fits. And you fit here. With me. If you're willing." "I'm willing," she whispered. They went into supper then, to face the knowing looks and good-natured ribbing of the Triple B crew. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, wedding plans and town gossip and the eternal battle to keep a ranch running in hard country. But tonight, June sat at the long table surrounded by the scent of beef and beans and belonging. Boaz caught her eye from across the table, a promise in his glance that made her feel warm as summer sunshine. Around them, the men talked and laughed and argued about everything and nothing. Home, June thought. After all the miles and mistakes and misunderstandings, she'd finally found home. And it was exactly the right size. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about June and Boaz's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more listeners discover this heartwarming frontier romance.